Plugins versus analog hardware. This is something that I've been wanting to test for a very long time, especially getting the opportunity to work with so much analog gear after coming from a plug-in heavy background. You see, I always had this idea that I feel like has been kind of pushed onto me that plugins are just as good as hardware, and we've come so long in technology and all that good stuff, which is awesome. And this is not discrediting plugins at all. I still use plugins all the time. It's more of a fun test to see if that's true. Let's take the actual analog hardware that these plugins are modeled after, and then we're gonna go to two different plugin companies and compare and see which is better, which is worse. Can we even hear a difference? First test that we're gonna do is the Universal Audio 1176. It's arguably one of the most famous compressors of all time. We have 4 of these in the studio. We're gonna just stick with this top one here, which is the oldest one that we have. It's more of a vintage style, and I think that's more of what the Waves one is based off of, as well as the Universal Audio one. And those are the two companies that we're gonna be putting head to head against these analog miracle workers. The second test we're gonna do is the Teletronics LA2A. These are personally my favorite compressors that we have in the studio that I've ever used. These compressors are so versatile and can be used on almost anything. You can crank these compressors and it still doesn't sound like it's squashing the crap out of it. Waves and Universal Audio both make plugins that are based off of this unit, and this is the one that I'm honestly most excited about. So for this test, we're gonna try to remain as transparent as possible. There will be no attempt in trying to make one sound better than the other. We're gonna start with pushing each piece of gear pretty lightly. Then we're gonna go and kind of go to the extreme so we can really hear how they compare against each other. So here's my Pro Tools session. We have 2 exact copies of the lead vocal. So this first one here is the lead vocal that we'll be using the analog gear with. And then, of course, the lead vocal plugin still going through the console on a separate channel that's gonna have the plugin comparisons. So you can see on the lead vocal right here, we have 2 plugins. It's just a EQ and a de-esser, and I just copied the settings down just to kind of clean it up a little bit and make it a little less raw. So first of all, it can be kind of pleasant to listen to, but also that we have a really good comparison. Let's start with the lead vocal. This is gonna be the 1176. Right now, nothing is patched. We'll just listen to a little bit so you can kind of get the idea of what it is.
It's 4 a.m., this room is spinning. I just can't shake these voices from my head.
Awesome. So I'm gonna push play on the vocal. I'm going to insert our 1176 compressor and kind of dial in the settings how I would normally dial them in for a mix. Let me turn on the insert and let's play with some analog gear.
It's 4 a.m., this room is spinning. I just can't shake these voices from my head.
All right, so that's sounding pretty good. It's pretty light compression. We're not trying to do anything super heavy. So right now we have the exact same settings on the Universal Audio 1176 as the hardware version. Let's go back and forth, seeing what sounds the best. First we have the hardware version.
It's 4 a.m., this room is spinning. I just can't shake these voices from my head.
All right, now we have the plug-in version.
It's 4 a.m., this room is spinning. I just can't shake these voices from my head.
All right, so obviously the gain isn't quite the same. We're not getting as much input or output. You can kind of see the compressor on the plug-in version isn't really reacting at all, and the hardware version is reacting quite heavily. First part of the test, we now know that if you copy the exact same settings, it doesn't work at all the same. So I think now what we need to do is I'm gonna kind of play with the input and output and try to get it to be as close as possible in terms of how the analog compressor is actually working on the vocal and match that to the plugins.
It's 4 a.m., this room is spinning. It's 4 a.m., this room is spinning. It's 4 a.m., this room is spinning.
All right, so that's pretty interesting. It's looking like we're adding about
12-ish dB of gain compared to the analog version. And overall, they sound pretty similar. I can hear that the attack and release, even though the settings are matched, it's not quite accurate, which would kind of make sense because a lot of this analog gear, like the values on analog gear aren't necessarily exact versus a plugin, it's exact. And this 1176 was modeled, I'm sure, off a very specific one unit 1176, and they all react a little bit differently. We have 4 in the studio, and they're all completely different. You could match the settings on all of them, and they don't quite react the same. But one thing this test kind of sort of leads into is a lot of times whenever we're especially working with analog gear, we would like to really push the gear because you don't hear the compression as much as you typically do with a plugin. So the fact that we're boosting so much here just to get the desired effect, I wonder what's going to happen whenever we really start to push the analog gear and see if we can even get close on the plugin. Let's try it.
It's 4 a.m. This room is spinning. I just can't shake these voices from my head. Fear that there's a demon in my closet, and I can hear the ghost under my bed. I stare up at the ceiling in the darkness.
Now we have the actual hardware 1176 really, really pushing the vocal, and it's technically getting over minus 20 dB of gain reduction, but it doesn't quite sound like that. You can obviously hear the compression, but in a mix it might work really well. So let's see if we can kind of get the same effect using the plugin 1176.
It's 4 a.m. This room is spinning. I just can't shake these voices from my head.
All right, so that's looking about exactly right. Now let's make sure we get the gain right.
It's 4 a.m. This room is spinning. It's 4 a.m. This room is spinning. It's 4 a.m. This room is spinning.
All right, so listening to both of these, it's really interesting. The plug-in version is kind of struggling. It's definitely sounding really heavily compressed. I'm hearing a change in frequency response as it really smashes the compressor, so kind of sounds like a blanket was thrown over the vocal, and we're having some really intense S's coming out. Whereas on the analog gear, it's clean. It's clean, it sounds good, it doesn't sound like it's way too much, there's no blanket that's being thrown over it. We still have the lows sitting really nice, we still have the highs balanced as far as where we started without the compressor. It's really interesting. I think the most interesting part is if I was doing a mix with just this plugin and I really wanted that sort of an effect, I would immediately have to put another de-esser on the plugin to take care of those S's. And honestly, I would choose a different plugin because if I wanted that heavy compression, this plugin is just not quite doing it for me in terms of this vocal. So to me, analog totally wins versus the Universal Audio 1176. I don't know, it just kind of shows, I guess, there's limitations with plugins, which is fine. So now we're gonna we're gonna do the same test. We're just gonna keep this heavy style compression, but we're gonna do the CLA 76. Let's see what we got with this guy.
I just can't shake these voices from my head. It's 4 a.m. It's 4 a.m. This room is spinning. It's 4 a.m. This room is spinning.
All right, interesting. So I actually like the waves better, which really surprised me because I've honestly have never really been a huge fan of this plugin. It has its place, it works great. I just honestly haven't used it very much in my mixes. But this one's actually a lot closer to the analog hardware than the Universal Audio one was, which is kind of funny because they're the same. Universal Audio makes the 1176, so it's really interesting. The biggest thing I notice is there's less of a blanket on the plugin version, but there's a little bit of loss of frequency content that's happening when this plugin's reacting, and also the attack and release times are not close. The hardware version with these exact same settings, it seems like it has a little bit faster of attack, at least at that position. This 76 is reacting a little bit later. But overall, this one's closer. So if you're gonna go for 1176, I recommend the Waves over the Universal Audio. Let's try out the LA2A and see how that one does.
It's 4 a.m. This room is spinning. I just can't shake these voices from my head. Fear that there's a demon in my closet, and I can hear the ghost under my bed.
I love the LA2A so much. It just sounds so good. You can compress so much and you don't really hear it that much. I'm gonna match the exact same settings on this LA2A and let's see what happens. All right, let's compare. So first we're gonna hear the hardware version.
It's 4 a.m. This room is spinning.
All right, and now the plug-in version.
It's 4 a.m. This room is spinning.
It's the same thing. We're not getting the gain that we're getting out of this analog gear. I think that's one of the biggest takeaways is you just get so much volume out of this hardware. From the power source, I don't know. It's pretty incredible. So let's do this again and try to get the settings to match exactly.
It's 4 a.m. This room is spinning. It's 4 a.m. This room is spinning. It's 4 a.m. This room is spinning.
Pretty fascinating. At the exact same dB of reduction, it's just killing the vocal. It sounds terrible. We're really pushing this plugin to its edge, which is interesting because we have so much more room to go. We're not even really pushing this plugin very hard. So now we're gonna hear, this is the hardware LA2A.
It's 4 a.m. This room is spinning.
And now the plugin LA2A.
It's 4 a.m. This room is spinning.
You can hear the release is totally different, the attack is totally different. When it really compresses and gets to that -7, the tone changes, the tone shifts a little bit, and it sounds very, very compressed and very, very pushed. I mean, we're getting close to the limits of this thing, so let's push the limit on the LA2A as much as we can and see how the plugin does.
It's 4 a.m. This room is spinning. I just can't shake these voices from my head. Fear that there's a demon in my closet, and I can hear the ghost under my bed.
All right, so we're obviously pushing it really, really hard. Not something I would necessarily do, but it still sounds good. It's crazy. Still sounds great. Let's try to get the plug-in to react in the same way, at least in the gain and the reduction.
It's 4 a.m. This room is spinning. I just can't shake these voices from my head. Fear that there's a demon in my closet. It's 4 a.m. This room is spinning.
All right, so we're gonna hear the analog hardware LA2A.
It's 4 a.m. This room is spinning.
Now we're gonna go to the plug-in LA2A that's kind of as close as I can gain matched here.
It's 4 a.m. This room is spinning.
It's interesting. It actually sounds pretty close. This one I would say is reacting a lot better than the 1176 did. It still sounds pretty good, but as you can see, we're having to push so much. Like we have peak reduction almost at 100%. We're pushing the gain like crazy. I have the fader all the way up here, and it's close, but it's just not there. On the hardware, our gain is 20 dB below what the plugin is, and our peak reduction is 30 dB below, which is crazy. It's wild to get the same effect. So there's room to actually push the hardware even more, but in terms of the plugin, we're maxed out at this point. Now let's go to CLA's LA2A. So I'm gonna try to get these settings to match. Let's see what we got here.
It's 4 a.m. This room is spinning. It's 4 a.m. This room is spinning.
All right, so we have them close. I think I'm again impressed by waves. Before this video, I would have never thought that. I always just had this idea that the universal audio stuff was better. Now I'm just not really so sure anymore. Same thing, let's hear the analog LA2A.
It's 4 a.m. This room is spinning.
And now the CLA2A.
It's 4 a.m. This room is spinning.
Oh my gosh. I think I like the waves a little bit better, at least in this example. And what it is, it's the attack and release time. The attack is a little bit faster on the CLA2A versus my analog LA2A. And on the analog version, I'm getting a little bit of the low end that comes out right before it brings the level down with the compression. The CLA2A is seeing that and it's bringing it down ahead of time, which is technically better. Wow, hats off to you, Waves. You win in both examples. It's pretty crazy. So what we found is that obviously the analog hardware performs very well. It doesn't necessarily change the harmonic content when it's compressing. I mean, if anything, it really is adding some really nice, pleasing harmonic content to the vocal. And overall, the Universal Audio 1176 and LA2A failed the test. In my opinion, they didn't perform well. They throw blankets over the sound when you're really pushing them. If you're just using them to compress stuff lightly, like just kind of normal, they do work very well. Now the Waves plugins did so good. So good. Just can't tell you how impressed I am. You can push the 1176 and the LA2A quite hard and get a really nice sound out of them. And they compare to the analog gear pretty close. It's pretty close. I think in a mix, it'd be really hard to hear the difference specifically between those. The only negative I have on those is the 1176, just the tone. It affects the tone a little bit more in a negative way than it does on the hardware. But the LA2A it's so close that you're really unsure which one is technically better, which is kind of cool. I hope you enjoyed seeing the comparisons and seeing how the gear does to plugins. I'm really curious to know what you thought was better, whether the analog hardware or the Universal Audio or the Waves plugins. I know we were pushing things pretty heavy, but that was kind of the point of the test. If there's any other gear that you saw in this video that you want to hear tested, maybe the SSL, maybe the Tube Techs, maybe the Mag EQs, anything like that. Ooh, we might have to do a reverb Bricasti and a 480 comparison. That would be really interesting. But yeah, throw any ideas in the comments. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you on the next one. Peace.